It is fun to be here with Mike Moreau. You are the president of Concord Consulting, really instrumental in bringing traits to the market and in seeing how this is a really good fit for companies. What I wanted to start off with, Mike, is the basic question: what is traits?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Traits is a psychometric assessment tool, and so lots of different tools that exist out there in the market. Lots of them have different things that they end up doing. Many of them fall into specific boxes around trying to categorize where people fall in and don't. And Traits is a little bit of a different assessment tool in that built specifically for the workplace and really built around scales of behavior. So being able to understand the intensity of different characteristics that show up in the population.
You just mentioned intensity of characteristics. And I know we've had lots of conversations about this, but explain to the average person, what does intensity of a personality characteristic mean?
Yeah, good. I threw myself into something there, didn't I? When I think about intensity of personality, I think that there are lots of normative behaviors or normal behaviors that end up coming in. And so if you think about one scale called sociability, everybody fits somewhere on that scale, and we can have some that are more intensely towards the reserved side, and we can have some that are more intense towards the social side, and you need to talk and interact with different people. And there's a whole bunch of us that exist somewhere in the middle, and so I'm a big believer that you're not one or the other. So in this idea of different assessment tools that might exist out there, where it's more of a categorization, you're either introverted or extroverted. To me, that's just really limiting in terms of looking at the way that people show up. I always use the explanation of it's sort of like categorizing the world into short or tall, and it's such a limiting measure because you have a whole bunch of people that fit somewhere in the middle there, and some extremes. We don't really, we don't notice you as much if you're in the middle of that. It doesn't stand out as much, but the intensity of a 6'8" basketball player sure shows up when they duck to get in the room and come in. But I think when we look at measuring behavior, being able to do that with a scale as opposed to a category. So 6'8" as opposed to tall, you get far more information when you use a scale to describe something like behavior.
This is so important. You know this. Again, we've discussed it a lot. For me, some of the problems I had with any assessment in the past was that it categorized. It put somebody, myself or somebody else, in a box 4, 8, 16, however many categories there are. And when I started to learn what traits is all about, it's almost as if these 7 points on a graph, on a piece of paper, can come alive. They paint more of a mosaic, more of a picture, more of, I keep telling people, it's almost like you start to see the matrix. There are all these numbers and letters. And when you start seeing more of these, you start to see a whole person rather than a category that fits into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, whatever categories. Does that make sense? Would you add to that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think again, using scales of behaviors, we get far more information far more quickly. Again, as opposed to just falling within a box. We don't describe many things in the world in boxes or containers because there's different pieces that come in. So I could use that same short tall example on weather, and you can't say hot or cold, but if you said 32 degrees and humid, now all of a sudden there's more detail that starts to come up, or 32 degrees and dry. And so again, when how much is humid? Okay, good. Yeah, great question. 98% humidity with 32 degrees. Oh, okay, that means something to somebody. That just gives more information. And that's where I think you sort of see the traits come alive, because we get access to all of that, and we see things in scales, and now we see the depth of information that it ultimately gives us, or insight into people.
So valuable. And again, I like that analogy because it's almost as if that data becomes living now. We can relate it to something rather than having vague almost like astrological. This is what might be. It's something specific, measurable, quantifiable, something that we can do something with. So let's maybe bridge that and move into what can you do with this. Often when I'm describing this to companies, we're talking about personality of people and then personality of a job or a role. Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I believe the more accurately you can measure someone, the more that we can start to understand the implications of those characteristics and how they show up when we put them into specific jobs. And so, if you take somebody that is, on a scale is is a 2 out of 10 in terms of emotional control, they tend to emote in significant ways, and we put them into a job with a whole bunch of engineers that typically, again, because we measure people, we measure them accurately, and we get this consistency that show up. So engineers typically are higher on emotional control. And so we can start to now see, if we measure people accurately, we can see what are the implications of actually putting somebody that's lower on emotional control and with a group of people that are very high on emotional control. And we can start to predict what's going to happen over time. But then if you bring that to a job situation and you think about, geez, I hired somebody in accounts payable and they never really were as productive as what we needed them to be because they kept getting out of their desk and going and talking with everybody. Well, if we could measure some of those characteristics to see what made them maybe less effective in that job, maybe we could actually use a tool to be able to figure out, well, what would be effective inside of this job? And the same thing goes with managers, with directors, with VPs. Being able to see if you have somebody that is a vice president that's far too collaborative in the way that they do things, and we measure that, and we see that gives us more information for making better decisions into the future, being able to say, well, in my team doing the things that we really needed to be able to do, we needed a VP that was going to be far more risk oriented and far more decisive and maybe even a little bit less collaborative and more decisive and moving things forward through the organization. But now if I can see what makes people successful into those pieces, I can replicate that over time in different positions in an organization. Figure out the personality of the job, figure the personality of the people, put them together to see how closely they match, and be able to draw implications because of that.
Okay, so every time you say anything, I'm thinking of like 6 more questions. I'll try to be brief with some of this. But the first question would be, I've come across organizations that hear about this tool and go, well, hold on, I don't want this to disrupt an organization. I don't want it to be, you're not a fit, or you are bad, or there's something wrong with you because you are on this scale somewhere. What would you say to address that concern?
Yeah, it's something that we get pushed back on with people that haven't been exposed to the tool yet. And this is not about trying to necessarily exclude people, trying to give hiring managers far more insight about the individuals that are coming into the position. And there are always reasons why you may want to bring somebody that's higher on assertiveness into a low assertiveness job. There may be a reason for that, but it probably has more to do with succession planning over time. But I find what a lot of people end up doing when they're not using a really good tool is they end up putting somebody into a position. One of 2 things happen. Either one, we change the job to suit the person, or 2, we need the job to be that way. And so then we try and change the person all the time. And so you run into issues either way. It's sort of like I hired somebody to manage, but all they ever want to do is do all the work themselves and never delegate things down to people. So then I guess I change the job around, but then I really don't get the kind of productivity that I need out of that position. Or 2, I follow up with that individual and just say, every 2 days, delegate things down to other people, delegate things down to other people, delegate things down to other people, get your hands off of things. And now I'm not really doing my job as a manager of that individual, which I should be out there leading and taking other things on. I'm actually going in to help that person do their job every day. And now the organization isn't as productive because of it.
with either situation, you've got a lack of efficiency and you're putting the person or the change of the role, really the person, over the organization's needs in some ways, correct?
Yeah, that would be certainly one way of putting it. Yeah, making it work for the individual, and over and over again. I think that works for a certain level or for a certain period of growth within organizations. Especially entrepreneurial organizations that are very small, which like it's all hands on deck. But the more an organization grows, the more sophisticated it becomes, the more specialized the positions become, and turnover happens inside of organizations. It's a natural thing that happens because you can't be a generalist anymore. Managing marketing, customer service, and accounts payable. Now we actually hire people to do those specific positions, and now we need somebody that does have more specialization, both from a knowledge standpoint and from a trait standpoint, to be able to do those jobs effectively.
Excellent. Okay, one other aspect of that concern that I've heard from companies is, well, does this mean I'm bad? And I keep saying this has nothing to do. None of these traits are good or bad. It's like saying, is 96 degrees Fahrenheit bad? Or is, like you said, 50% humidity bad? Well, that's almost an insane question, because in certain situations, that won't be a fit. In certain situations, it's ideal. If you're in Cuba, you want a certain temperature and humidity for cigars or whatever, where that's not ideal for growing something else. Does that make sense? Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I've worked with several organizations. People have worked in different companies, and what do you find out? Well, there are some companies that I just don't fit in. There are some environments where they don't fit in, you haven't fit in, and there are some where you absolutely do. And so, why is that? Why are there some where things just feel so good, everything fits, and some where they absolutely don't? And again, I think that it has more to do with really being able to, as an organization, understand, well, again, what do these different dimensions look like for us? If everybody can say they have a proactive or a energetic or a sense of urgency about the way that they do things inside of business, a change culture, but saying the word and actually understanding the people within that culture and how they interpret that, what they interpret that to mean. That's what people walking into a brand new job find out very quickly and start to say, again, this isn't a fit for me, and that's not a bad thing. This means that you will fit very well somewhere else. So never a negative thing, just you will fit somewhere else really, really well, and you need to go and figure out where that is. So why doesn't every organization use traits? Because then that would make this a whole bunch easier for every candidate that exists out there in the world, because they could just figure out the jobs that they fit best into, and go into roles where all of a sudden they just feel fulfilled every day because that job is asking them to do the things that just feel natural to them and that they would do anyways.
Makes so much sense. Okay, let's switch gears here and talk about the traits in the assessment. What is measured? What are the different traits that are looked at, and maybe fill in a little bit about what those mean?
Yeah. So, excuse me, 7 different traits that we measure. The 4 primary traits are assertiveness, sociability, patience, and detail orientation. And so if you think about this on a scale, again, the further you move over on the scale of assertiveness in one direction, the more naturally accommodating somebody is going to be in the world. And again, increasingly so, the further you move over, exactly the opposite on the other side, the more assertive or aggressive somebody's going to become on the other side of the scale. On sociability, the more social somebody will end up on one side versus more reserved on the other. Patience, more impatient versus patient. Detail orientation, somebody liking structure and how to do things in their life and specifics versus more big picture sort of approach to things. And so, which of those 4 is the right one to have, and to what degree is it to have? Well, it depends. There is no right answer on that. What's the job really is really the question. And so, to be extreme on this, if you brought Richard Branson in, who probably is quite low on detail orientation, he sees the big picture. He only wants to be involved in the biggest of challenges and issues that are out there in the world today, solving the world's biggest problems. But when you bring him into a data entry role, a very detail oriented, don't get anything wrong type of a position, his traits end up quote unquote being bad in that type of environment. And again, that's not a slight against the human being that is. It's just that the job that we have that person in does not align. Their traits don't align with the position. So, anyways, four traits to start off. Secondary traits: behavioral adaptability. So, being more consistent versus more versatile in terms of different situations and being able to respond to outside stimuli as it comes in, and being able to adapt or adjust to that. Emotional control, more emotive, wear my heart on my sleeve versus more logic oriented. Receive information through my mind and think it through and process it from a mind standpoint as opposed to a heart. And then creativity, so really about somebody's curiosity. So there's somebody is over to the right hand side, the more curious they are about new information, the more questions they ask about it. Further over onto the other side, the other extreme would be more traditional. Tend not to ask questions about things. Tend to go back to the proven methods that they've used in the past to solve the problems of today. Again, every job needs a certain degree of those. We don't need people that can fulfill all of those all of the time. And there's probably some consistencies that show up that would say business development people probably on average need to be more curious about the world around them. Where using another extreme, again, a data entry position probably doesn't need a whole bunch of creativity. Maybe their supervisor needs a little bit more than they do, but not a role where we're trying to reinvent the wheel of it.
Excellent. This is really helpful. I'm going to go back to the Richard Branson example just for a second, because Richard Branson would cause havoc in a data entry position for the company, for anyone around him. It would be absolute chaos. And again, it's not that Richard Branson is evil or bad. He just has a much better fit somewhere else. We've got to find that better fit for him. And we've got to find somebody else who's a better fit for that position. But I'm going to transfer a little bit over to categorization. We kind of coming full circle what we talked about a little while ago. And that is, so much of the time, businesses, to make things simple, categories make things simple. If I can say good or bad, hot or cold, that makes everything simple. Having said that, organizations are not simple. And to simplify something that is very complex actually takes away from, again, efficiency, competency, how well an organization is going to grow and compete with other organizations. Again, speak to that a little bit to wrap this up a little bit, Mike, and then I'll make sure that I allow you to get on the road again.
Sure. Well, again, I think this idea of categorization is, we think about it in this idea of boxes. It creates almost too much of what I would call a bipolar approach to things. And so back to our temperature example, it is hot and humid. Again, that doesn't provide enough information. But if we were to write a report on that, we could write all sorts of information about what hot and humid means. And we'd probably get some of that right based on whatever hot description we wanted to use. And we'd probably get some of the humid things right, but it just wouldn't be accurate in reflecting, again, 32 degrees, 98% humidity. There's just so much clarity in being able to do that and to be able to understand what's going on, or 32 degrees and 60% humidity. The implications of that are significant in terms of how you move forward. So to put people into that same category, we're all so complex in so many different ways, but to really categorize us, is limiting. Lots of people would say, feels like a lot of the things that these reports are describing are almost like a horoscope, and some of them I can kind of check off, but some of them, lots of them I can't, and so it's just not as descriptive. The better you can get at actually being able to measure, not categorize, but measure somebody, and then standing back and studying how that shows up in terms of performance, in terms of different jobs, the better you're going to be able to predict in the future different kind of roles that you put people in, and what you need to look for in your candidates or or current employees for succession or career planning initiatives that you have.
Excellent. Well, I hope that this is simply allowing people to think and come up with 100 questions themselves, because that's what happens whenever I think about traits and the potential that this can be utilized for in an organization. Thank you so much for doing this with me, Mike. I appreciate the time.
My pleasure, Mark. Always love the connections and the conversations. And guess what? As somebody you who are higher on creativity, all of these questions, what a surprise that they would all continually come to you over and over again. It's almost like we could have predicted that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.